because, I reconnected with several of my friends along the way. And this was the question I was pondering is what value does friendship have? I had these dear friends I hadn't seen in 20 years, so I needed to go see them. And how important were they? People just yearn for connection, right?
I'm Justin Jay, and this is The Plug. There was a time when we were teenagers when who our friends were, what they were doing, and where we were meeting up felt like the only thing that mattered. They shaped who we were and meant everything in the moment. Friendships felt so simple back then, but somewhere along the way, it got more complicated. Today's guest is a New York Times best-selling author who set out to explore exactly why that is. You might recognize him from his roles in St. Elmo's Fire, Weekend at Bernie's, and many other classic films. But he's proven himself to also be a deeply observant writer with a gift for capturing honest human moments. For his recent book, Who Needs Friends, he traveled more than 10,000 miles across the country, sparking conversations with strangers in diners, rodeos, and truck stops in an effort to explore the state of male friendship. The insights he gathered from everyday Americans were remarkably candid, personal, and revealing. It's a topic men don't often discuss, yet one that people were surprisingly eager to open up about. So what happens when a Hollywood actor decides to reinvent himself as a serious author? And which member of the infamous Brat Pack refused to be a part of his recent documentary about that group of 80s actors? We'll find out as we sit down for a chat with a movie star who proves there really are second acts in American life. Today, actor, director, and chart-topping author, Mr. Andrew McCarthy. Andrew McCarthy, thanks for sitting down, man. Super appreciate it. It's great to see you.
Good to be with you.
I guess first off, congratulations on your new book, Who Needs Friends. It's part road trip journal and part exploration of the state of male friendship in America. And it's a really personal book, but it's also a topic that it's not really addressed much. And I think it's something that everyone can really relate to and get something out of. And, I really enjoyed reading it. So, congrats on that.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah, I don't think it is something that guys particularly talk about much. I mean, I met a lot of guys on the road, and invariably most of them, maybe all of them said after we'd been chatting, I've never talked about this before. So it was really interesting because I would approach random people. I was just in a gas station or in a restaurant or in a hotel lobby, and I'd just say, "You should talk to me about your friends." And they, looked at me like I was nuts. Nobody said no, and it was interesting. So anyway, it was something I was interested in, and then as I started talking, guys, it really seemed like it was something worth discussing.
We'll get into some of those responses in a minute, but I mean, first off, you drove. You claim over 10,000 miles across the U.S. by yourself working on this project. And you took countless impulsive detours, sometimes several hours out of the way just on a whim. And what struck me was the contrast between the romance of the open road and the reality of the loneliness of being by yourself for that long of a time in your car. And, honestly, one of the first questions that came up to me was, how the hell did you pass the time driving for that long? Were you listening to music or books on tape or podcasts or just marinating in your thoughts? I mean, what did you do to kill that much time?
Well, yeah, I did drive about 10,000 miles, and I did wander. It was an unintentional road trip. I had no intention when I started to do that. And I never went, well, not never, because I got stuck sometimes, but 95% of the time, 98% of the time, I never went on interstates or large highways because I don't like driving, and I particularly hate interstate driving because I just find I don't like trucks, and so it causes me great stress. And so I started just going on back roads, and once I downshifted my mental sort of normal thing, we'll just get there, we got to get there, to no, the journey here is the point here. And I'd started to discover America in a way I'd never discovered America. It turned to be a fantastic thing to go on these little 2-lane roads all the way across the country. So I did listen to a lot of audiobooks. I think I got into a whole Joseph Conrad jag. there, which is a great kind of company. A lot of times hours would pass sometimes where I was just in my own head.
Yeah.
Sometimes I was talking to my friends on the phone. Now driving now, you're not as isolated, except out in the West. There were a lot of places where there was no service and I was way out there. And it took me a while. It took me about 6 weeks. It wasn't so much, I didn't drive any more than like 4 hours a day generally, 4 or 5 hours a day max.
Okay.
And if I feel an impulse to go somewhere, I just turned and went. You know what I mean? It was all very improvisational. And I never made any plans or any, reservations or anything like that. It just sort of opened myself to letting it evolve. I knew I was going to see my friend in Wyoming and I'm in Texas now. Now I just got to figure out how to get there.
So, I mean, I think for a lot of people, your name is immediately tied to a handful of these iconic 80s films, whether it's Lesson Zero or Pretty in Pink. But what I found fascinating is that, you've built this entirely different body of work. I mean, most people may not know this, but you're a 4-time New York Times bestselling author. You've been editor at large of National Geographic Travel. And when I read this book, what struck me was like how little your acting career really comes up in this book. I mean, it really has very little to do with fame or Hollywood. And when you first became a published writer, were there a lot of skeptics from within the literary community being like, oh, the guy from Weekend at Bernie's wants to be a serious writer now? I mean, did it take you time to feel validated and comfortable in your new role as a writer? What was that experience like?
That's a good question. Well, when I started travel writing, travel, how long's a piece of string here? How much do I back up? But travel changed my life. I started traveling after my blush of fame and sort of the 80s and stuff. And my life sort of started to become my own in a certain way. I started traveling the world and I realized, and that changed my place in the world. And so then I started writing about travel. And when I started, I thought I'd be received exactly like you just said. Oh, the guy from Pretty in Pink thinks he's a writer now. Great. So I would approach editors by email and I would just say, my name's Andrew McCarthy, and I wouldn't tell them anything of my thing. And so I would pitch them and I did my homework and due diligence. So like this kind of magazine does this kind of stuff. And I was really good at pitching to different outlets. And I knew by the time I was outed, which I would be at a certain point for being the guy in Pretty in Pink, I wanted to have written for the New York Times, National Geographic, The Atlantic. So they go, oh, oh, really? For those? So that's what happened in my travel world. So in the travel world, I gained respect for having written for all these really good outlets before I was outed for being the Brat Pack dude. And then it just evolved into books. And so I've come to realize, too, that I don't really care. If somebody's and we all do it, we all prejudge or think we know one thing about someone, we think, I know what that person is.
Yeah.
And we all do it all the time. I do it all the time. It's been happening to me for 40 years, and I always hated it because, early on in my career, I was stigmatized for being in the Brat Pack, which we hated, and which is, over the time I've come to realize it's an extraordinary blessing, but it took me a long time to get there. But even having it was done to me, and I do it to people all the time. You think you like I say, one thing, and you think you know what they are, and it's just never the truth about a person. So, but because the long-winded answer is, sure, people still do that, but I don't. It's none of my business. I don't care. There's nothing I can do that would ever change their opinion, and it often really has much more to do with them than me.
Yeah. It seems like, acting is such a high profile and public endeavor. And one of the themes that you explore in this book, and one of the traits that you're pretty candid about, is your tendency sometimes to withdraw and to lean into isolation. And, writing as opposed to acting seems like it's inherently solitary. I mean, you're alone for long stretches, sitting with just your thoughts at a keyboard. I mean, that's a big contrast from being a screen actor. And did you find something really liberating about that transition?
Oh, heaven. I think it suits my temperament much more. But I haven't acted that much. I'm doing a play right now, but I haven't done the play in 20 years, and I haven't acted that much. I directed a lot of television, and then I was doing the writing and stuff. So it's all kind of the same to me, in the sense that I just like to make stuff. I feel lucky that I get to make something. And with writing, you don't have to wait for somebody to give me permission to do it. So I like that aspect of it a lot. And it suits, I wasn't temperamentally suited for, fame or public success particularly. And I also realized very early on that there's no intrinsic value in fame. And it's not going to make me a better person. I like the trappings of it because everybody wants to feel special and get what you want when you want it. And none of those things are particularly conducive to, making you a better version of yourself. So I like being successful enough that I get to do the next thing that I want to do.
Yeah. Oh, you wrote a lot of really vivid descriptions in your book about these small dying towns and
Mm.
these abandoned landscapes, and you kind of used them as a metaphor for the decaying state of the male friendship. And on one hand, this book paints a kind of sad, almost cynical picture of the American male psyche. Men who struggle to express vulnerability and connect emotionally with other men. But what I found so interesting is that when you prompted conversations with these complete strangers about these really personal topics, you got answers that were surprisingly candid and wise and introspective. These are just regular rural people. I mean, cops, cowboys, waiters. Did you get the sense that most people had a lingering desire to open up and just needed an opportunity? Or are you that good at disarming people?
Well, I hope it's not cynical because I didn't feel that way about it. I did encounter loneliness, but I think everybody wants to be seen and wants to be heard. And I was interested and I was unthreatening but I wasn't creepy. And so I presented myself as sort of a neutral because I was genuinely interested of people's experience and in a varied group of people as I could find. What is their experience with friendship? Because, I reconnected with several of my friends along the way, but I was really interested in other guys. The further from home I get, the more open sort of and the more I always use travel as like the university of my life. And this was the question I was pondering is what value does friendship have? I had these dear friends I hadn't seen in 20 years, so I needed to go see them. And how important were they? What value did they have? And yeah, you're right. Guys told me stuff that like some random stranger, they just would open up to me because I go, uh-huh, uh-huh. I feel that way. And then people start connecting. People just yearn for connection, right? And so I think that's one of the lessons of men are so busy, because men show vulnerability, that's equated with weakness. And the one thing a man can't be is weak. So, and how that's like saying apples plus a guitar equals this. And it's like vulnerability is nothing to do with weakness. And yet it's become misconstrued in our minds as guys. And so I just thought that was interesting. But I also found a lot of examples of deep friendship out there too. I'd encountered these two cops in Ohio who'd been friends for 60 odd years. And one of them said, "Well, I don't know how when one of us dies, the other's gonna have to go too, because I don't know what we'll do without each other."
Sweet.
And they're happily married. There's heterosexual men. They're talking about their love for each other in a way that was just so beautiful to me. That was alien to me, very alien to me. But I envied it.
Yeah, I mean, well, one of the themes that kept coming up in this book is this men's aversion to vulnerability
Yeah.
and how it's an impediment in a lot of male friendships. And you talk about stoicism and cowboy grit and being emotionally reserved and how a lot of these traits can kind of be trace back to competitive survival instinct. Like whether historically protecting and providing for yourself and your family, whether it meant, hunting mammoths or defending your village, that's a responsibility that shaped how men related to each other. But in a civilized society, the need to protect and to provide is mostly become a financial one. I mean, like making money, achieving success. And so you'd think that maybe in a modern context, the guys who've quote unquote made it materially would have the most evolved friendships, but that doesn't seem to be the case. I mean, why do you think vulnerability still reads as weakness, even when the survival stakes are so different?
Well, that's a really interesting point, and it probably talks a lot to how money really has nothing to do with success or connection, and yet we place values on money that it can't deliver.
But it does give a sense of security in terms of being able to provide for your family.
Well, that is the one common thing that every male I talked to and asked said, the burden of providing, because that it was forefront in their minds all the time, and it defined their relationship to themselves and their consequently then how they interacted with the world. Those who felt they were providing in a just a solid way were more relaxed and open and less defensive and less angry and felt less isolated, I think. But that is a notion that we carry as men that we need to provide. That is how I keep score and how successful I am. And I think that's a huge and it's a separating thing between men and women. I think my wife can understand me when I say that in theory and go, yeah, okay, but but my wife, like I mentioned in the book, is wildly capable and more capable than me in many, many ways, and yet she doesn't feel that same thing that I do. And if I mention it to my friend or to you, you just go, yeah, of course we feel. It's a challenge. That's a big one. And but see, what the thing then, what my experience is, most men don't talk to each other about that. So you're carrying it alone. And so when you're alone, you're separate. And so when you're separate, you're perceiving threats that may or may not be there because you. And so that can be a dangerous. It's not conducive to healthy living. You know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this book really gets set in motion when your son makes this observation that you don't seem to have a lot of close friends. And I found that really funny because it's basically the entire premise for the movie I Love You, Man. I mean, Paul Rudd's character kind of overhears his fiance say essentially the same thing to her friends. And, I have a 10-year-old and I'm constantly amazed at how effortlessly he can walk up to strangers and strike up a friendship. And I definitely didn't have that skill at his age. And, even today, I feel like I've refined my social skills and, I can hold a polite conversation. But, cultivating a new one-on-one friendship feels increasingly more difficult the older you get. Why do you think that is?
Well, I have to say I was grateful in this book because I had some reason to talk to people. This is not answering your question, but I was on point, so I could just ask them about a topic, and it created an intimacy between us that was somehow in a cocoon of safety because we were talking about a topic, and I could open myself up to them in a certain way, but because we were talking about a topic. But I don't know why it is, and I don't know that I experience it as more difficult as I get older, or I just am more selective in certain ways. Because I found I've created some really lovely friendships as I've gotten older, but I care less about what other people think about me. So I've been able to be direct with people that I do like. I mean, but that guy's really interesting. And so to reach out. So I don't know that my experience is not necessarily that it is harder. That seems to be the rule of thumb, that it's hard as we get older. Because certainly when you were younger, you're in school together, so you're spending time together and all that kind of stuff. You're forced together every day. You're seeing these people. And so for me to actively, if I think you're a cool dude and you seem like an interesting guy, if I want to go, but what we can't do is guys to go, hey, you want to get a cup of coffee? That would just be weird. Right?
Yeah.
So we have to find some activity that we can then connect over, whether you play golf or whether you.
That's what I was going to say. That's why golf
But
exists.
but also, it's not to be dismissed. That sense of parallel play in a certain way, and that's how intimacy is created between guys. One of my more recent friendships is I moved in next to this couple, and I'm like, good fences make good neighbors. I don't need to know these people. I don't want to know. I don't want to. But I was building a basketball hoop for my son in the backyard, and I'm terrible at do-it-yourself stuff. And he popped his head over the fence. He goes, "Oh, Milton, you need a hand?" I'm like, "Do you know how to do it?" And he came over and we built this fence. It took us like 4 hours to build this hoop, and by the end of it, we were friends.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was a common activity outside of ourselves. So I don't know that it is necessarily more difficult, but it certainly takes a decision in a way that and then willful act of making oneself vulnerable. If you invite somebody to do something and they turn you down once or they can't, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
First one, you have to go play that round of golf or it's never going to.
I mean, I feel like this book kind of touches on this notion that there's almost like a fundamental difference between how men and women engage in friendships. And, I was thinking about this recently because I had a really close friend who's kind of going through a lot. He's separated from his wife. His mom passed away. His dad's in assisted living. He's basically living at home by himself in his parents' old house. And I went and spent the weekend with him. And, we grilled steaks and hit golf balls and, smoked some weed and watched movies and laughed. And we had a great time together. And when I got home, my wife started asking me questions like, oh, does he have a new girlfriend? What's he doing for work? And all these questions. And I was like, I don't know. We didn't really talk about that, and I started questioning, God, am I really that shallow? But I mean, the fact is, that's just not what he needed from me at that moment in time. I mean, our friendship was a reprieve from his problems, and he just needed some companionship, But I think that most women would probably have handled that situation a little bit differently. I mean, do you agree with that? Is that a blanket statement?
But you're right. Like I asked my 12-year-old, I go, where does he go to school? This kid you just met in the fucking, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't ask him that. Well, what'd you talk about? I don't know. We just hung out, and we're still that. And but that, I think you're exactly right. That's what your friend needed, was just sort of that. And we just need to show up for each other, right? We just need to show up.
Yeah.
And so I think, but women do handle things differently and talk it out in that way. Guys, and my wife, I think I mentioned this in the book. My wife talks about one of my friends. She goes, Sebby's pretty slippery, Andrew. I'm like, yeah, I know. And like when Sebby does something and it's a little kind of, it's soft around the corners, it's like you're not getting the whole story. I'll say to him, dude, don't pull a Sebby on me here. What's going on? You know what I mean? And he'll laugh and he'll know what I mean. But I'm sort of honoring his sense of privacy and his own, and that's it means I also see him and just accept him for who he is without having to say, I see you, I understand this is an issue you don't want to go into, but it's safe space. We're not going to say that, but
It's understood. Yeah.
but so it's just a way of communicating that's different, but it doesn't mean it's less valid.
There's a moment in this book, and it's about 80 pages in, when you mention one of your first best friends, Sean, and how you guys were inseparable. And then one day you come home from school and he was just gone. He had moved away and you didn't get a chance to really say goodbye to him or have any sense of closure. And it really struck me that you kind of buried the lead with this story. I mean, that feels like a really formative experience. And I'm curious, do you feel that like abrupt loss of a friend that close had an effect on your approach to friendship as you got older? I mean, did it make you more guarded? Did it make you more hungry for connection? Did it have an effect?
That's really interesting. I never forgot it. So I suppose it's had an effect on me. Maybe, I'd like to think that it made me realize how valuable friendship was, and that, you get hurt in life and you'll survive it. It does all those things. It did all the things you said. It made me more skittish, made me more yearn for connection, made me more value connections, to have all those things. It was just an early example of, one gets hurt in life and people have their own agendas or whatever. Like I think I said in the book, that hurt happened because of adult disregard. They didn't care about. They weren't thinking. They were thinking about themselves, not about like how are their kids affected. And so as you go through, what's that Joseph Campbell on, as you go through life, pigeons will shit on you. Don't bother to wipe it off. It's like, this is what happens. You're going to get hurt. And the problem with flies is when we get hurt, we just then harden up, and then that's just not in our best interest. So yeah, you're going to get hurt. This is life.
You did another project that I really loved, which it deals kind of tangentially with friendships, but in a different way. You directed a film about your experience being part of the Brat Pack. And, for my generation, those movies really shaped how we thought about identity and alienation and kind of really gave us insight of what friendship could look like on screen. But for some of the younger listeners who might not be as familiar, can you just explain real quick, like what the Brat Pack was and why you felt compelled to make a film about your experience being part of it?
Well, sure. In the 80s, culture changed and movies changed. And the Hollywood studios realized that kids went to see movies 5, 6, 7 times. Grown-ups went once. Oh my God, let's make movies for kids. And so that's what happened overnight. It's hard to imagine now because movies now have never changed from that adolescent mentality. But before that, movies were adult entertainment, really. But once movies became to be about kids, and then John Hughes came along and honored young people and honored their emotions as valid and real and true and important. And then the younger generation took, and I was a group of forefront of actors at that moment who was coming of age that got to be in those movies, and a certain generation, your generation, just took us to heart and have carried us ever since. So if someone of that generation will come up to me now and they'll look at me and they'll start talking about, oh my God, The Breakfast So Pretty in Pink, these movies, and their eyes will glaze over, and I'll realize very quickly they're not talking to me anymore. They're talking to their own youth, and I'm the avatar of that youth. And because it's a wondrous moment when you're young in your late teens, early 20s, when you're just cusping into life and your life is a blank slate to be written upon and your world is beginning. And it's a wonder. It's like a dawn. It's like for that 5 minutes when the sky is florid red, it's just oh my God, it's so beautiful and it's so attractive. And that's what we captured in those movies. And so then a writer came along who was a little bit who was also of the same generation, who was a little bit jealous of our success, and wrote a very pejorative, negative article called "The Brat Pack" about these young actors. And Hollywood, being Hollywood, resented these young actors because suddenly all these grown-ups are out of work because of new kids now. And so when somebody came along and said that we were brats, they went, "Yeah, see?" And so the Brat Pack label became very negative and pejorative inside the movie business. For the outside world, it was just a wonderful label. We represented all the things I was just talking about. But for inside the industry, it became a very negative thing. And so it affected our careers adversely for a time. And then, like I say, over a long time, I came to realize, it's probably the greatest professional blessing of my life. Had the Brat Pack name not existed, I'd be a guy who was into rando 80s movies. As it is now, I'm part of this iconic movement that happened, and so I had not seen any of those actors in 30 odd years. And I just thought, and I wrote a memoir about that time called Brat. And as I finished the book, I realized, wow, now I know what it meant to me. And I realized I am the avatar of youth for a certain and I wonder what my fellow Brat Packers feel, because I hadn't talked to any of them in 30 odd years. So I went out and dug them up.
I mean, it seemed like the documentary really feels like an attempt to kind of make peace with the label that some of you guys seem to really deeply resent at the time. I mean, the actors, I got the sense that they felt the term was, it was reductive, and it kind of flattened this group of serious young actors into almost like a caricature. But the irony is, I don't think the general public thought of it as an insult. I mean, I don't think...
Absolutely not. Yeah. No, the public.
It didn't feel especially mean-spirited or dismissive. I mean, and looking back on that now, do you feel like there is like a real disconnect between how the label affected you guys versus how it was perceived culturally? I mean, did revisiting that chapter change your understanding of that experience?
Well, writing the book made me realize that culturally it was a beautiful thing. And like I said, that's the term I always say, the avatars of youth for that generation. And then the movie, what I found interesting about making the movie of it was how much affection we all seem to have for each other now, which wasn't the case when we were young. Despite that we were labeled this group, we weren't really friends. We were young, scared, competitive. There's only so many pieces of the pie, and, we each need a piece. And so now so much time had gone past that it's all water over the dam, and we just it didn't matter, of course. So, and we were all members of this club. We didn't ask to join. And so I could just look at Ali Sheedy and just go, oh, hello, Ali. And know her.
Yeah.
I don't know her at all. And yet I can look at her and know her and know what a certain very powerful aspect of her life was about. And she can do the same for me. And so having that kind of identification and connection was a lovely thing. It's sort of like the same thing as this book, just connecting with old friends, connecting with those people I worked with was a lovely thing, and then the notion that we had so much more affection for each other now, and that allowed me to then have affection for my own youth in a way that I never had before.
I mean, one of the things that really struck me as so interesting is that how differently all the actors remembered and how differently that affected them at that point in their lives. I mean, Emilio Estevez, for example, he seemed to carry a lot of resentment about that label. I mean, he talked about fixating on the roles that he thought that he may have lost because of being associated with the term Brat Pack. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have like Demi Moore and Rob Lowe, and they seem to kind of look back on it quite fondly. I mean, Rob seemed to recognize that it was like this temporary, real special moment that he seemed blessed to have been able to be along for that ride, and then Molly Ringwald, she, as far as I know, declined to participate in the film at all. And so, I mean, looking back, why do you think that the same period produced such vastly different emotions and memories for all the different actors?
Yeah, a couple of people didn't want to be moved, and I thought that was just proof of concept of how powerful it was in our lives. So I was just like, okay. Yeah, I mean, I totally understood and I get it. But personally, I can only speak for myself, and that I'm so glad to have gotten I get that. I'm so glad to have gotten to the other side of it and look at it as like, wow, that was amazing, really, but it just speaks to where people are in their lives, I guess, and we all experience the same, we can all experience the same events differently.
As someone who grew up in Carpinteria, I was very thrilled to see that you stopped to get a cheeseburger at the Spot on your way to interview Rob Lowe. So.
That was a great spot, that place. Yeah.
I've been going there since I was a child. Yeah. So.
That's great. It's a great place. Yeah, and it was one of my favorite movies. The movie when the guys asked me what I'm doing, and I say, "Yeah, it's about the Brat Pack. You ever heard of them?" He's like, "No." I just thought that's kind of perfect.
Well, I guess my last question is, how did your friend's investment in the Vietnamese and Venezuelan currencies pan out in the end?
Any day now. Yeah, I'm waiting for the call.
Waiting for the call. Well, we always like to end the podcast by asking our guests to plug something that they aren't directly involved in that they feel isn't getting enough attention. It could be an author, an artist, a TV show, a movie, a cause. Is there something that has really been meaning a lot to you lately that you want to give a little extra attention to?
There's a Canadian writer from Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, called Alistair MacLeod, who I recently reading his only one novel called No Great Mischief, and some wonderful short stories. And I think he's the most beautiful writer I've ever read. And so I would shout out to Alistair MacLeod, who's died, but his books still live on.
Good. Well, I really appreciate you sitting down. Once again, I really enjoyed your book. For anyone who hasn't had a chance to check it out, go read Who Needs Friends. It's a really, it's intimate, but it's also easy to read. And I think there's a little bit of something in there for everybody. So congratulations on that. And thanks for taking time out.
Thank you.
Cheers. Best of luck with everything.
Thanks. Enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening, and a huge thanks to today's guest for dropping in. If you enjoyed this episode, do us a favor and take a minute to rate, review, follow, or subscribe. This episode of The Plug contains original theme music by Andrew Van Weingarten and Dan Drohan. Mixing and sound design by Matt Boynton at Ultraviolet Audio, logo and branding by Italic at italic-studio.com, and you can check out my photography at justinj.com. Thanks again, and be sure to check out the archive and tune in for future conversations.